Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kate Tuttle, and I'm joined here from your left by Anelise Chen, Leanne Shapton, and Ben McGrath. And we're talking about the art of losing. Not the Bishop poem, although we might get to that, but losing when it comes to sports. And I thought I would open with a favorite scene that I remember watching every week when I was a child, which was the beginning of the Wide World of Sports, when the announcer would talk about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And I'm sure all of us remember the image from the agony of defeat, at least when I was a kid, was a guy spinning out of control at the bottom of a ski run at the Olympics. But I'm curious, the rest of you, if you have a moment of an agony of defeat that you remember either from your own sporting life or from your life as a sports fan.
Mine would be Bill Buckner in let's celebrate the loss of my favorite team. But yeah, so I was 9 years old at the time. This was Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. And unlike the ski crash, this is sort of something happening in slow motion. It's sort of a painfully drawn out. The ball, Mookie Wilson hits the ball. It's very slowly bouncing. You're preparing as a fourth grader or whatever to finally experience victory. And this was when I felt fully indoctrinated into this cult that I had been told, which was a sort of a folk literary cult of Red Sox fandom pre-2004, where we are supposed to get your heart broken. And,
Right.
I'd already been told by my dad that in 1978, when Bucky Dent happened, he was listening on the radio and holding me on my shoulder. So that's the one that sticks with me.
And that ball, just to be clear, when you were watching it as a fourth grader, did you think I could field that? It was that slow of a roller?
Certainly, I wrote, that was sort of the beginning of my career as a writer, so to speak. I wrote various sort of like nonfiction accounts of that whole playoff series, just for my family over and over again, in which it got more and more simple in every retelling. It was like the ball was dribbling,
right.
all you had to do was just pick it up with a bare hand. So yes, I think that clearly that was part of it. Is that, and the fan always has that of sort of like maybe I could play, but maybe I can't. I can't hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, but at least I could field that ball that Bill Buckner couldn't. Yeah.
Got it. Leanne?
I don't know that anyone will remember this because it was a Canadian swimming moment, but at the Commonwealth Games, I think it might have been in '82, Victor Davis lost and smashed his chair in front of Queen Elizabeth.
Oh my gosh.
And he was, of course, vilified by the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star. But I just thought, okay, so he was sort of like Canada's McEnroe. He had a temper. He tried to psych out his opponents in the ready room. And I have to admit, I like it when athletes lose it a bit. And you get to see, you don't just sort of get to see this PR astronaut-like demeanor. You get to see the curtain drop a bit and how much kind of passion and frustration goes into it. And I have one more. I don't know if this exactly qualifies, but recently, the last Olympics, it's always so brutal to watch swimming because the sort of the placers, first, second, and third, often get out of the water, and then immediately someone comes up with a mic, and they're heaving, and they're just, they're wet and disheveled, and someone's, stuck a microphone, a commentator stuck a microphone in front of this swimmer's face, and she had come in third or second, not the winner. And the commentator said, what happened out there? And she just said, Wednesday I got my period. And it was like Olympic history. No female athlete had ever mentioned that, and it sort of pointed out the just complete arbitrary nature of winning and losing. A bad day can just fuck it all up. Pardon my. So that's one of my favorite losses when
I love that.
Yeah.
I also really had an interview too. She was like, I've had a bad day in a long period. I have a personal sports defeat. I don't think I've ever shared it with anyone. So here goes. I used to play water polo, and I was like the worst player on a really, really good team, and my position was like the set. I had to be in the middle, and like it's a really aggressive position. I don't know why I ended up there, but I hated playing games, and so one time I was just getting destroyed, and I got stung by a bee. Somehow a bee had come and like stung my finger. So I was so excited to tell my coach that I got stung by a bee. So can I get taken out of the game? And he just looked at me with this expression. I knew then I was destined to be a loser. So, yeah. But I mean, okay. But I ended up writing a novel that is just a collection of sports failures and defeats and the agonies of defeat, and actually have a photo of like a skier just sprawled in the snow. So I started writing my book during the Vancouver Olympics in 2010, and I guess, well, I don't know, it's kind of an aside, but I remember just watching the men's luge. It was like, it's the event where you get in a sled and you just go down.
And wasn't that the one where the luge run was unsafe and somebody...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was a very haunted event.
Yeah.
Because someone had just died a few days before, and I was watching this event and thinking how it was such a perfect analog for how I felt about life. Like you're just clutching this sled and hoping to get, I mean, it looks like there's no strategy involved whatsoever. It's just
hanging on for dear life.
Hanging on for dear life. And that's exactly how I felt. So so that was like the moment that I started writing my book. But.
Wow.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
To me, the other interesting thing in retrospect about the Bill Buckner thing is that actually the game did not end on that play, and nor did the series. That play tied the score. And then
that
they went
led
on
to a
lose.
game...
And then that led to a game 7, which they
Okay.
lost. But the assumption immediate among the people in this sort of folk literary tradition of Red Sox fandom was that, okay, now here it's happened, it's over.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that, like, had anything changed, like, what if Bill Buckner had indeed missed that ball, but they had gone on to win Game 7? How would we be thinking about it now? But such is the power of the way we frame these sports as sort of literary narratives.
Yeah.
That even though it didn't lose the game or the series, those are the two words you can say that like sum up the 1986 World Series. Is just Bill Buckner, a play that happened before the end of the games of the 6th game of a 7-game series.
I mean, it's the most mythic moment, so it's the one everybody clings to.
Right, and partly I think because of the question you asked before, which is that maybe it could have been fielded by a child, and so it's easier to identify that as significant rather than it could be that when someone swung and missed in the 5th inning of Game 7 on a very good slider, that was just as impactful. But
Right.
yeah.
Right, and they have, the baseball statisticians always talk about, you can't sort of hinge everything on one play.
Correct.
But as a mythopoetic way of understanding sports, of course we do.
Sure.
One of the things we were talking about just before this was how losing, as opposed to winning, losing is more literary. Losing sticks in our minds more, it makes a better narrative often, or more emotionally resonant. And I wonder if you all could talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that sticks in my mind there, again, if we're going to stick with baseball for a second, is the natural, where maybe you think of Robert Redford hitting the home run at the end. His bat splits, but he hits the home run anyway, and there's fireworks. But actually, in the book, he strikes out, and so the Hollywood version is kind of more trite, but the book is kind of more powerful because it's. If you remember, he was tempted by gambling. He was going to throw it all, and then he finally decides to do the right thing, and he still fails, and he's a broken man, and that's how it ends, and that's a little more true to life. So I think there's more depth certainly to losing in the story.
Yeah, there's more life to lose.
And more life too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Some of my favorite stories are of the sort of silver and bronze contenders, or I'm thinking of I'm thinking of that Amadeus and Salieri and Mozart, and thinking of like the talented Mr. Ripley, even there's Greenleaf and Ripley, and there's sort of this winner-loser thing, but to focus on the winner is actually quite straightforward and boring, but to sort of go, okay, what's it like as a Salieri or as a Ripley, or in the Thomas Bernard story, the loser, the unnamed narrator, grows up and goes to a music academy with Glenn Gould.
Right.
Mixing up my music stories with Glenn Gould, and just to be in the presence of a certain genius at a certain period of time relegates you to being the loser. And these have made some of the most, again, poignant and interesting stories, and ones I particularly like. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when we were talking about this earlier, it made me think of one of my favorite essays by Kathy Acker. And Kathy Acker was a poet and novelist in the New York punk scene, but she was actually a very avid bodybuilder, and she couldn't really write about bodybuilding. She's written about all sorts of things, but bodybuilding was difficult for her. And I think, and so she tried to write in this essay, but she talks about like the incompatibility of the language of the body and the language of the mind, and how bodybuilding and sports just exists in the language of the body. So anyway, she's trying to write about it, and then the moment that narrative kicks in for her is when she finds that her body has failed her and she can't do the reps that she was intended to do. And it was in that moment of failure that the story begins, and she begins to be able to write about it and find, why can't I do this rep that I can usually do today? And it's always in breakdown, that the story comes out. So she talks about the breakdown of muscle, and how, as a bodybuilder, your muscle has to break down for it to grow. And so destruction and growth just come hand in hand, and those are the elements of a good story. As opposed to winning, which is just growth.
Right. It just goes all in one trajectory.
Yeah, it
doesn't.
just goes on. Yeah.
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 Who was it who brought up the athlete dies twice? Was that you?
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell
I want to
us-
say it's
that's
a Hausman
Hausman?
poem, but I don't think it is. It's some poet
It's
in
like
the audience.
one of those sports maxims. Like,
Yeah.
an athlete dies
Yeah,
twice,
dies
once in retirement and once in death.
In death, yeah.
So how do you sort of clock the resonance between losing on the field and mortality? Like, as somebody who's writing about sports, do you think that's always sort of an echo there?
Well, it's a ghost story, right? Like, you get to write. I mean, you get to both live with two lives, and I mean, yeah, what am I trying to say?
Well, there's a very direct, it's like sport is a stand-in for these ritual sacrifices that we used to perform to, it's like
the gods.
Yeah, to the gods. It's an actual like burning of flesh, burning of calories to appease the gods, to ensure life-giving fertility, water, rain, things like that. And so there is it's like if you don't perform well, you don't like run fast, you're not going to get the bison, it's primal, like Jeff Dyer was saying. And so if you fail at that, and when we were talking about how at the end of games, like when athletes are so depleted, they're just like on the ground, they really look like they're dead.
Yeah.
So,
And every record broken, they say record smashed, and
Yeah.
like it's a little death.
It's violent,
you've just
right?
exerted so much that, But it's through that exertion that you prove to the gods, to whoever, that you deserve to live. I don't know. It's
Well, I think Ben was
life-affirming.
also talking about the idea of death, not necessarily death, but like giving into father time, like quitting versus losing, and retiring because your body isn't, ready to do the sport anymore.
Right, and her use of the word gods reminds me. So the most famous piece of sports writing that the New Yorker has ever published, I think, was by John Updike, which is called Hub Fans Bid Kid Adieu, which is about Ted Williams' last game, which John Updike watched because I can't remember what the story was. He had an assignation and he skipped it or something. But there's some reason why he was at the game that he wasn't supposed to be, and he writes about and for those who don't know, Ted Williams in his last game, he hits a home run in his final at bat, which is, the way the fantasy is supposed to go, but not the way it usually goes. And he refuses to then come out and tip his cap for the fans who are all, he had a famously complicated relationship with the fans. In Boston, he didn't really like them. They loved, it was unrequited. And so he refuses to come out and tip his cap, and so the line that Updike writes is, "Gods don't answer letters." And so he's sort of preserved Ted Williams and Amber as a god as opposed to as a human. Which I think is kind of the exception that proves the rule, though, because I think the more common and more powerful and more moving story with athletes is their struggle to give up, the fact that their body's failing them, but they keep going because they're not dead yet, and they don't want to just walk away, and that sort of that grappling with like I can't stop, but I'm. And also you're talking about people who we've perceived as gods for the prime of their athletic lives, and all of a sudden we're seeing the cracks, and it's sort of they're not a god anymore, and that brings them down to our level, which is reassuring, if nothing else.
I know the athlete coming out of retirement is always really interesting.
Don't you think it's also sort of pathetic, the athlete coming out of retirement? I mean, because it usually doesn't work. And I mean pathetic in the full sense of the word, that it inspires pathos. I mean, we feel something for that guy, but we know how it's going to end.
I don't know. I like that. We were talking earlier about why quit while you're ahead. Now just quit when you feel like it. I don't know. The story's not necessarily gonna change. I think we love Michael Phelps for 2012, not 2016 or what 20.
2012 is when he finally lost,
right?
And then had a minor redemption, right?
Yeah.
Where like Michael Phelps, these people are real swimmers. I am not. So I always saw Michael Phelps as a sort of boring champion who was mildly interesting when he was like really great, getting 8 gold medals just for the fact of his, I guess in the same way that some people
just
think,
eating like shit and stone.
in the way that people think that Tom Brady's interesting or something like that. He's too perfect or something. But
Brady's not interesting, is he?
Not to me. But
kind of like a robot.
But this is the thing. That's the way I saw Michael Phelps.
He's not going to smash a chair in front of the
That's
queen.
the way I saw Michael Phelps. And then all of a sudden, in 2012, he's not perfect anymore, and this is in between. Then is when I think he'd been in the tabloids for a little bit of bong use and
drug driving,
too much,
and now he's a spokesman for
dogs.
antidepressants or something. Like it's interesting. His afterlife is actually kind of
he wasn't so boring. And he lost the first race to Ryan Lochte, who's a total idiot, but a charming idiot, I guess. And so it was supposed to be Michael Phelps' coronation in my recollection. Like that was supposed to be the one where he was going to win the most gold medals of anyone ever in the history of the Olympics, which I think he did end up succeeding in doing. But the Olympics began on the note of him failing. He comes out of the tabloids, he fails, everyone is like, oh, what a loser. And then he's redeemed.
And just,
So do you think the failure gave him more layers for you?
It embodied the layers I was beginning to see in him, I think,
So, as you mentioned, both Anelise and Leanne were serious swimmers. Were you an athlete as a kid?
In a middling sort of way. I played both baseball and ice hockey.
Oh, okay.
And I still, to the retirement, I still play hockey twice a week. And so I have this, I'm 42 now, and my bosses sometimes always tease me, when are you going to quit? And to that, my answer is when I'm 70. I don't know, when I can't play anymore. But if I quit, it seems like I'm giving up.
Do you feel like your athletic career, whether it's ongoing as Ben's is or whether it's in the past for you guys, do you feel like your experience as an athlete has any relationship to your experience as a writer, and especially when you write about sports? What does it give you?
Sure, go ahead.
Athletes and what taking it to writing. Do I have the insane willpower and dedication that
Do
athletes
you get up
have.
at 5 a.m.?
No, I don't.
No?
Well, I think what athletes have that writers don't have is just like a killer life drive, whatever that, like if Freud, there's like Thanatos is the death drive, which writers definitely have, I think. But I think athletes have the reverse, eros or life. I mean, it's so just fulfilling to watch them. And I actually think that artists and athletes are so similar because both are in pursuit of the impossible, which is perfection, and you just work so hard to get to this thing, and you're always going to fail at it. And I actually think that winners they lose the most in a weird way because winners have such high expectations, and so they're always sort of not reaching what they've set out for themselves. So artists and athletes, they're both in pursuit of this ideal, and I think that there's a tendency to pursue it to such an extent that it deforms them and they become grotesques. Like I'm thinking of David Foster Wallace's essay on Michael Joyce, and I think David Foster Wallace was so drawn to these athletes because of this alliance. But he called Michael Joyce a grotesque because all he did every single day was try to become this perfect tennis player, and at what expense? What is his personal life like? What is his the life of his mind like? So
That's the string theory essay, right?
yeah, string theory. Yeah.
He was, 123 in the
Something-
world?
Yeah, I mean, I
170.
love
Yeah.
that essay because
Yeah.
he sort of, I mean, it does take a number 123 for there to be a number one. Yeah. I forgot that part about grotesque. Sorry, I'm going to let you
Yeah,
finish.
and I think the way that writers become too invested in the life of the mind, and then athletes are too, to the expense of an interior life, and so yeah, I don't know. I think just that kind of single-minded commitment, only athletes and artists have it.
But this is an interesting thing because I often ask artists or writers who I love, do you consider yourself an artist?
Yeah.
And very few say yes, but I consider so many writers artists. And maybe it's sort of too pretentious or to sort of say that as a writer, but I don't think it is, and I think it's just as hard as art, and it's just as hard to sort of say something no one's ever said before, or persuade or convey, whether you're an essayist. A lot of writers sort of say I'm a thinker or an intellectual at best, but I don't know. I love when writers think of themselves as artists. I don't think it's pretentious. But the thing that I took away from swimming was training, just write it 100 times and maybe it'll sound okay, at 101, or just that kind of rewriting, and just that you just have to put in the slog and the hours. And so I feel I don't know where else I would have gotten any kind of discipline. And I'm always curious where people get discipline.
And I think with swimming especially, because it's so contained in the pool and you're just going back and forth. I mean, it actually looks
you're
like
alone.
writing. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're alone, and
Yeah.
it looks like writing because you're just going line by line by line by line, and it looks like
Yeah.
nothing is happening, but something's happening.
Agnes Martin was a swimmer too, and she just those lines, and I think she went to Olympic trials. And
Yeah.
you can kind of again see the repetition. There's just so much repetition in writing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of writers I know seem to be into distance running, which a little bit like swimming, I guess,
Murakami, yeah.
has that kind of monastic and sort of self-driven element. Because my own experience was in team sports, I find the experience is different.
Maybe you're really good at being edited.
Writing is a solitary.
Right.
You'd have to ask someone other than me, but yeah, writing for me seems like a kind of solitary, sometimes lonely thing to do, and it has made me aware of some of my failings as an athlete, which have to do with self-doubt. And in a team environment, it's such a dynamic situation where you're how you feel about how good you are says as much as how good you actually are in terms of what you'll accomplish. And so the self-doubt that is sort of natural to many writers isn't a particularly good trait for an athlete, at least in a team, and probably not even in a solitary sport, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of my favorite parts of Mythologies by Roland Barthes is when he's talking about the two cycling brothers, like these famous Bobet cycling brothers, and one wasn't as good because he had too much self-doubt and he thought too much, and the other one like cycled so hard that he got like cancerous boils on his ass or something like that. So anyway, self-doubt's not good for an athlete. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Or a writer, yeah. I mean, the zone. I mean, is there a zone? There's a zone in writing.
There's totally a zone
Oh,
in
yeah.
writing.
Yeah, I know
But
it can be
that's
crippling
like-
for a writer, but I think it's common. It's just in writers.
The zone is crippling.
No, self-doubt is
Self-doubt is
Right,
crippling.
okay.
You need to
But the
overcome it.
self-doubt can also help you be a better self-reviser, self-editor, which you can't do if you're playing a hockey game, for instance. You can't revise, you can't go back and edit
Right.
the way you made that pass
Right.
that wasn't quite right or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. You can just regret it over beers afterwards.
Right. Oh, I thought you were going to say regret it over and over and
Well,
over.
right, with each beer.
Right.
Yeah.
More regret. What do you think about losing, to get back to the concept of losing? Do you have any favorite losers?
I have so many favorite losers. I guess I can. Well, there's my one favorite loser. Someone asked me this at the cocktail thing yesterday. This Japanese runner, Shizo Kanekuri, and he was running in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, and he got tired. He just decided to get a glass of orange juice, and then he got on a ship and went back to Japan. Never told anyone. So everyone assumed that he had died, but then, 54 years later, they found out he was still living, so they invited him to come back to finish his race. So, like, his official time says 54 years and like 2 children and 16 grandchildren or something like that. I really love that story because he just didn't care about it at all. Actually, I like to tell the story that way, but the real story is that he was so ashamed that
The shame.
he was the shame. But okay. Well, that brings me to another loser story, which is not. It's not humorous actually. It's very well. It's similar. It has something. It's the shame. It's a shame. But another Japanese runner. What's his name? Kokichi Tsuburaya. There's a really great documentary, and I think it's one of the best sports documentaries ever. It's Tokyo Olympiad by Kan Ichikawa. But you can see this runner in that. But he was supposed to win that one because it was the 1964 Tokyo Games, and he was like obviously the favorite. But he had been told his whole life that he could only look forward and never backward, and so he knew someone was coming up at the he was like in the lead when they were coming into the stadium, but he didn't look back, and he was like surpassed at the last minute. Anyway, he got bronze. That was very sad. Then 4 years later at the Mexico Games, he during the training camp, he wrote a note that said, "Can't run anymore," and then he held on to his bronze medal, and then he committed suicide. So that, so I guess it's like those are 2 examples of you can take the contest seriously, it is life or death, or you can just decide that life is something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me think that thing about not looking. Like, who told him not to look? Sounds like Euripides, and then that makes me think that he's my favorite.
Eurydice.
Orpheus and Eurydice, not Euripides.
But don't look back.
Don't look back.
Don't look behind you.
I feel like Orpheus is my favorite loser story. Wow.
Yeah.
Orpheus, the Amadeus, like the Salieri. That's supposed to be fiction. The narrator and the lose. I feel like I named all of mine. Ripley. Just again the sort of when losers, because they know what they've lost and will never get, they turn to cheating and lying. It's not like
Yeah, you mentioned you were fascinated by Rosie Ruiz, who cheated
Rosie
in the
Ruiz
Boston Marathon.
Yeah, it's just sort of the strategy behind cheating, and because you know you can't win, but you can only win by cheating or lying or doping, or like that's a whole other form of losing. That's always kind of, makes for good story.
Yeah.
So that relates to one of my two favorite losers, who is A-Rod, who, as we know, did cheat and do drugs. But I guess the reason I call him loser is because nothing he did was ever good. He was, even when he won, even when he hit 50 home runs and was the best player and was dating Madonna and posing shirtless in Mr. Park, he was always perceived as, to some extent, a loser.
Yeah.
By the sort of just the public at large. And his teammate, Derek Jeter, was always perceived as a winner. And A-Rod was, in every respect, kind of a better player. But he couldn't, there was just something, his insecurity, he couldn't actually claim the mantle of a winner. He was fundamentally a loser, even in victory. And that made him interesting to me in a way that Derek Jeter was never interesting.
It really is almost like a story, like a fictional work, the way you see those two guys and you instantly know which one is, kind of the winner, nature's winner or whatever, and which one has some kind of, there's something off about him.
It's just tragic, but it's comic, but it's you can't look away. It's just like, no matter what, he's posing in front of a mirror, looking at himself. He's just, everything about him is just a sort of a glorious train wreck. And yet, in an objective sense, it's like he's got everything going for him.
Right.
But he clearly doesn't feel that because he's doing everything wrong desperately again and again and again. And then my other favorite loser would be a different sort entirely, which is Eddie the Eagle. Does anyone remember the ski jumper?
The ski jumper, yeah.
Because he sort of represents the part of sports where we all think, like, oh, maybe we could, but for this or that, we could have wound up in the Olympics without trying and doing any training and without giving up the steak dinners. And so, yeah, Eddie the Eagle was a ski jumper who was he from England?
He was English,
yes.
yeah.
And, they don't really have ski jumping in England, so he made it to the Olympics as a person with no particular ability. And the reason he's fixed in my mind is because once my family was with some family friends of ours, we were on a skiing vacation in Lake Placid, and Eddie the Eagle was like on the lift line, just like training because he wasn't good enough to be training as a true professional. He was just on a regular chairlift with regular people, and it was like, look, he literally is just one of the schmucks like us. And so it's the closest I ever got to an Olympian before I became a journalist was Eddie the Eagle.
That's interesting. So that's like the loser as this down-to-earth, lovable, because we can relate to him.
Right. But, and he's lovable partly because the stakes are so low. I mean, he's a low-level winning loser because it's sort of like, it's low-hanging fruit. He's.
I like the idea of there's like the lovable winner and the lovable loser and the different qualities of lovable.
And the lovable winning loser, which is what, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Lovable. Is that a good thing? Who wants to be called lovable?
I wanted to talk just about one more thing, and then we'll open it up to questions. But this concept, Leanne, that you kept coming back to, which is that losing in sport is like wabi-sabi. Can you explain the concept of wabi-sabi and say why it relates to losing in sport?
Probably not as well as we did, like in the writer's lounge. But yeah, I mean, the concept of wabi-sabi, and correct me, you guys, if I'm getting it wrong, is sort of the beauty in the imperfection and the beauty because of the imperfection, and how, a winner needs probably 575 losers to set up that relationship, and also seeing cracks, seeing flaws. There's always been art and poetry about the imperfect, the crooked nose, the wantonness in the dress, like all this stuff. And I think maybe in the arena of sport, the losing, the exhaustion, the failure, the defeat, it gives us those degrees, those 360 degrees, rather than sort of the two-dimensionality of black and white, win or lose. And yeah, it can have I feel like Dyer said something about this. It can have a sort of a beauty and aesthetic all its own. That's not just like face planting splat. yeah.
There's like a nobility in defeat often. I mean, it's one of the, I think that's what Dyer was
Necessity
getting
and
to, that when, I mean, somebody's always going to lose, but he talked about, the handshake at the end of the game, and the sort of, that losing is what allows us to become good sports.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another pitch for Tokyo Olympiad is that it's so good because it's a sports documentary that doesn't have, there's no like narrative or voiceover. There are a lot of lingering close-up shots of the losers, like after they've lost. So the winner, I mean, is like somewhere else, but you only look at losers, and you look. The camera also goes to athletes that quit midway through. There's a beautiful shot of a runner who just decides, she like kneels over and lies down in a bed of flowers, and I was like, I can't believe this is. But it's just like, it's such a beautiful painting and it's such a great image. So I love that documentary. It's a lot of expressions of it's the beauty of losing, I think.
Or like of number 27 or 123.
Yeah.
Or I wish that those Olympic moments, and they always go for the sort of the placers, and they have these little documentaries, and their coach and their mom and their high school teacher, whatever. But if they did that for, 47th or something, it would be the same story,
Yeah.
more or less.
Absolutely.
At that level. I mean, that's the point of that David Foster Wallace piece. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, shall we go to some questions now? Ben is circulating with a microphone, and if you raise your hand, here's this. Yep.
Hi. So talk about gender perceptions of winning and losing.
Oh.
Gender perceptions of winning and losing.
Well, my first thought is Serena. And again, she can be so wonderful and graceful and articulate, but I am really glad that she can also McEnroe with the best of them and break down that and actually show some rage and show some passion. So she, the stereotype, I suppose, of the gentler, the gentler sex being gentle. I don't know. I just love that she kind of breaks that down.
Yeah, and Claudia Rankine writes about it very poignantly in Citizen. There's like a whole section on just how does Serena Williams' body signify at Wimbledon, for example, like when she's having a tantrum, if she's acting like an angry black woman, comparing that with something like McEnroe would have done, or a male contestant, why her emotional response becomes, is read in a completely different way. And she has a great line in Citizen too, where she says, the body bears more than its physical weight. She has so much just history and rage.
And it's not that women are looking at that, or an audience or spectators are looking at it and going like, oh my God. It's sort of like, oh wow, it's interesting, and it's not taboo or I mean, she gets a bit of finger wagging, but
or more than a finger. She gets penalized and fined.
That's true.
She does.
And then the media is like writing all this. How dare
I guess
she?
so. I guess I'm just talking subjectively. I love it.
I mean, one gendered thing, don't you think, is that men in athletic loss are allowed to cry. It's one of the few arenas in which men are allowed to really cry.
You're right, but when he first asked the question, my mind flashed to Tom Hanks saying there's no crying in baseball in
A
League of Their Own.
League of Their Own, yeah.
Which was clearly
Who wrote that line?
Based on this presumption at the time, of course, that men don't cry, only girls cry. But you're right. Then I was thinking of, but then some of the moments we find the most moving are when they pan the dugout or something and show the guys with the towels draped over their head.
Right.
So men are allowed to cry, but somehow it doesn't make them less manly. But when women cry, we used to at least think that that's so typical.
Right.
I feel like now that more women are playing sports and more women are being taken seriously as athletes, I think it's improving that those expectations, I'd like to hope.
Upstairs.
I have a, is this on? Yeah, I have a question about the relationship between losing and the power of negative thinking. It seems to me something happens when a fielder misses a really easy ground ball, or a tennis player loses 3 break points in a row. Something happens to the player and also to the crowd. So I'd just be interested in your comments about that.
Do you mean the power of negative thinking, as in it's actually you can harness it for?
You know, I missed that ground ball, we're going to lose the game, even though there's another game to come. Or I drop 3
Right.
break points, I'll never have that chance again. Does that change the athlete? It certainly changes the audience.
Right, but that was sort of one of the points I made earlier, I guess, about how the Bill Buckner play wasn't in fact the end, and yet we all perceived it to be the end. It's sort of an inevitability. And yeah, it's a good question about whether the fans, certainly, negativity is a very powerful component of the spectator relationship. You know, some fans identify very strongly with kind of hating the team that they love, and counting on them to fail. You guys would know better. I sometimes think that athletes who have reached a professional level are like the rest of us have been weeded out, those who allow negative thinking to creep in. And so
Yeah.
most of the people
Yeah.
on your television
Yeah.
screen are people who don't allow that to
Yeah,
happen.
I mean, like athletes who are playing at a certain level have incredible mental health, like healthy mental
Or
health.
it's
like-
unhealthy because it's completely delusional, but I think but I think it helps them play
Yeah.
better.
They've like, you know, you can see sometimes, you know, in tennis matches when someone is really trying to focus and not think of you know, letting those points drop and just focusing, like Dyer said last night, on the next point, on just the serve and not on the set, or not on the game and not
Yeah.
on the match. Like that ability to just block, again, block reality and block what's happening and block the tone and mood of the fans. I mean, it's so, I mean, one good thing about swimming is you don't hear much underwater, but I can't even imagine what it's like to hear like a groan, or, I mean, it's must be so heavy.
What was it like when you were competing? Do you remember if you had negative thoughts or any thoughts at all, or just positive ones?
No, it was it was horrible. I had this thing where if I yawned a few times before a race, it would be a bad race, and I had trouble kind of controlling that negative thought, and it perpetuated sometimes. and
Yeah.
it was horrible. Yeah, I didn't.
Well, I think now, like even on kids' teams, they have psychology coaches that teach you how to tell yourself great things about yourself,
They must have. I mean, it must be a little bit like cognitive behavioral
Yeah.
therapy.
so you don't
how that
choke and
works.
things like that. But yeah, I once had my students. I once had them do this exercise where they had to get into the head of like an athlete, like Lance Armstrong or someone, right before the race, and just like how is this person talking to themselves, and then and then the experiment was carried out, and you realize like just how much uptalk they have to do constantly just to maintain that kind of I don't know, like just you just have to win so badly. But anyway, so it must be really hard to write from that. So anyway, they realized that it was very hard to write anything of value from that position because it's not like interesting at all, because it's
Really
like,
single-minded.
It's very single-minded. Like
dumb
I'm
focus.
amazing.
It's
Like
dumb,
I'm gonna
yeah.
beat them, and this is what like. And it's like but.
Yeah.
Yes, Damon Bird from Nashville, Tennessee, and I've enjoyed your talk on the art of being a loser. And can you tell me
Thank you.
about good sportsmanship in sports? Can you tell me how important, or what is the place of good sportsmanship in sports?
Yeah, I think good sportsmanship is so much rarer now, but, oh yeah, like Jeff Dyer was saying this last night. One of my favorite moments was when, I can't remember which Olympics it was now, but I think like the Norwegian cross-country ski team like went and picked up someone else's gear or something, and like, this is a terrible anecdote, so I don't remember any of the particulars. But good sportsmanship, Oh, well, I guess I have an anecdote. I'm not sure if this is good sportsmanship or just a perversion of it, but I wrote about the tennis player Andrea Jaeger in my book, and I don't know if any of this is true, but according to my research, she, I don't know if you know her, but she like was #1 at some point, but then retired to become a nun. But before she did that, she was so uncomfortable with winning because she just knew how much it meant to others that she just would force herself to lose. And she would just wage this that's, that was her tale. She was like, she would just look at how upset the other players got once they lost, and she just felt like she couldn't do that to another person, so she just started losing willfully.
I think
But I don't know if that counts as good sportsmanship.
No.
I think it's when,
That's weird.
I think it's like a demonstration of empathy and equality, like when you step outside of the court, so to speak, and you go, oh, it is like it could go either way, and there's this recognition that that I don't know. I do love those handshake moments. It's sort of like, okay, we just, wanted to kill each other, and now so it's scale. I feel like good sportsmanship is scale and actually putting something in its
Back
its
in the
place.
balance,
Yeah.
sort of. Yeah.
Well, that's, if we were in Edmonton, I feel like it would be, we would all be thinking of the handshake line is like a very iconic, important part of any hockey tournament, right? Like at the end of every playoff series,
You go
like
past.
they've been beating each other bloody, they all have to line up and go and shake hands, and that's sort of like, it's very important to the sort of the institutional identity of hockey culture that it always ends in a handshake, toothless,
Yeah.
Bloody.
And then sometimes
bloody
people
eyebrow,
Slug people.
shaking it. We've been in the arena now. We're stepping back to real life. It was all just a game. It was war, but now it's just a game.
But
The handshake?
I think it's cathartic for them. I think it's sort of they need to. It's a necessary come down, right? You've been ratcheting up. I almost wonder whether football players should do it. I mean, football players are like hopping themselves up on amphetamines so they can be monsters out on the field, and they don't have that wind down period at the end where they get to be like, okay, now we return to civilian life. But they don't hug their opponents. I guess they kind of they do. I guess they all kind of merge in the middle. And actually, sometimes I take it back. You're right.
Sometimes they
There's often a
pray.
prayer circle
Yeah.
at the 50-yard line where
Yeah.
both teams will get together. So you're
Yeah.
right, and that's an important part of that ritual as well.
I also like when in interviews and that people like when athletes who aren't always known for being the most articulate, like commentators or anything, but when they do talk about other players' talents, I think that's kind of wonderful
Yeah, it's sweet.
because they think about their opponents constantly a lot of the time, and so when they do, praise them, it's kind of wonderful or acknowledge it.
Hi. So I'm aware that a big part of the dark side of our culture is that we hate losers. And for people who lose can sometimes receive that projection or think of it themselves that, in fact, that means you're a loser if you've lost. And I'm wondering, as you watch competitions, are you aware of that ever in your own psyche?
I think I sometimes have like the reverse where I look at winners and I think of everything they've lost. Because, we tend to, I don't know, winning and losing like all exists on a continuum. You win some things and then you lose other things. Like you can be extremely good at baseball but be completely deficient as a father, as a family person or a friend. And maybe, and you hear stories of athletes who've had to, make incredible sacrifices. So I sometimes it's hard for me sometimes to watch sports anyway because I think about everything they've had to sacrifice and maybe like what pain does their body experience. But about losing, so So anyway, that's my answer. Is that losing always comes around to a kind of victory, and that victory always comes around to a kind of loss.
We have time for one or two more questions. I have one here in the back.
Okay, well, I was just going to add to that last question, though. I feel like I personally sometimes have a contradictory response to it, which is that I find it easy to identify with someone who's losing in a very conspicuous way. I'm reminded of at the Olympics, the same 2012 Olympics, when Michael Phelps finally lost. There was a swimmer from, I forget what country, it was like Latvia or something like that, who finished one of the long distance races like a lap and a half behind everyone else. Actually, I think he was from Iran. And it was moving. I mean, by the end, everyone was sort of giving this guy a standing ovation. It was sort of easy to identify with the plight of this person, and it felt important to a lot of people sort of intuitively around the room to buck up this person's spirits. And I think we collectively, and I sort of have a harder time making that leap with people who lose narrowly. I mean, it's sort of like when the person who comes in third, we don't necessarily have as much sympathy for as the person who comes in 17th. But it's an important, very important
They've
point.
won at losing.
Right.
They've won the loser.
It's right.
Well, I was just going to say something else. Oh, I've lost it now. But it's about. Can you help me out?
Let's
No
just
one
take
can help
another
me out.
question. I think
About
Ben
winning and
is back
losing.
there with his mic.
Hi. In '86, okay?
Yep.
The ball went through Buckner's legs. It did end the game. It did end the series. It wasn't Game 7.
Right.
But in your 9-year-old heart of hearts, you knew what was going to happen in Game 7, did you not?
Oh, correct. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in an area with Mets fans, Yankee fans, and Red Sox fans. And every single Red Sox fan who I did heckle the next day said, it's over.
Yes.
And if you recall, Game 7 was rained out for a day.
Right.
It was rained out on Sunday.
Right.
They played it
Prolonging
on
the
Monday
misery.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah, just prolonged the agony.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, the question was,
Not
did
with
you
respect.
forgive Buckner in 2004 when you finally won the World Series? Was it cathartic, like you don't hate him anymore?
I think I'd forgiven him before then, or at least I flatter myself in retrospect to think that I had forgiven him before then. But actually, the weird thing for me, which brings us back to the power of losing as a story, is that 2004, which is when the Red Sox finally won and broke the supposed Babe Ruth curse, was this great cathartic moment. And yet it was sort of, my mom warned me about this, and I thought she was, she was not a sports fan. She didn't really understand what she was saying. She warned me that it would be less satisfying to be a Red Sox fan from there on out. And unfortunately, that has been borne out. That has turned out to be true. The Red Sox have since won a number of times, and it's less and less satisfying to me each time. And to the point where the last one, which was a year ago, I didn't even watch. And it was like somehow my identity as a Red Sox fan has been broken, and it just isn't compelling anymore because I can't identify with this tribe that has a whole folk history anymore.
That is time.
And that is time. Thank you so much for coming, and let's thank our panelists.